Hello and welcome back to London Cycle Routes. Today I'll be showing you how to cycle from Seven Sisters in North London to Bloomsbury in Central London. This ride takes about 35 minutes and you can do the whole thing on quiet streets and protected cycle lanes. By public transport, the same journey takes around half an hour, so cycling is definitely competitive with other modes of transport. If you find this video useful or you just enjoy watching it, then please don't forget to subscribe to the channel, as I try to post new videos just like it every week. I'd also like to say a huge thank you to everyone who generously supports the channel on Patreon. If you'd like to contribute as well, you can find a link in the description below the video. Alright, let's get going. So we're starting on West Green Road, just north of Seven Sisters Station, and we're going to turn around and head down Brunswick Road. This is a cul-de-sac with no traffic on it, and it leads us into a park which we're going to cycle through. The park is imaginatively called Brunswick Road Open Space. We're only going to be in here for a second, but do remember that the path is shared with pedestrians, so don't ride too quickly and give everyone plenty of space. Take the exit for Roslyn Road and we'll find ourselves in a really quiet set of streets which we're going to pick our way through now. We're actually in the St Anne's low traffic neighbourhood here, which is a set of streets that Haringey Council has quietened down with things like that bollard that we went through and other strategic road closures to remove through traffic from the area. From our point of view, it creates a really nice east-west route through this part of town without any cars and a nice alternative to the main road. This is actually one of 3 new low traffic neighbourhoods that Haringey Council has put in the last year or so, and I'd say they've made a huge difference to getting around the borough. Previously Haringey was a really difficult place to cycle around, and there are certainly still some very tricky bits, particularly the main roads which need a lot of work, but at least there are now backstreet alternatives that are really nice and quiet. Now, we've more or less been heading in a straight line since we left the park, but we're going to turn off left now to go south, down a street called North Grove, which is slightly counterintuitive, but that's what it's called. I actually quite like the name, as it does help me remember where to turn off. One thing that could be improved about this new LTN is to improve the crossings and links in and out of it. The end of North Grove that we're coming up to here in a second is a really good example of that. You really do need to stop and look and just make sure that there's nothing coming, and there's quite a dodgy mini roundabout here which is no good for cycling as it can lead to some really unpredictable turning movements by cars. So that's an area of improvement, but for now just keep an eye out and be careful. We're now on Hermitage Road, and it is really a road of 2 halves, this one. The first section that we're on now is just about tolerable. You can see that there is some traffic. There is through traffic through here, there are routes. There's also a bit of light industry around, so you might run into the odd van and people can come down here quite fast. However, there is a filter further up the road, some bollards that stop through traffic going through. And on the other side of that filter, it's dead quiet, just like a low traffic neighbourhood, really nice cycling conditions. You can see the bollards just here. I mentioned light industry earlier, and this used to actually be quite a major manufacturing hub. Today it's known as the Haringey Warehouse District, but it wasn't just warehouses, there were also factories. One famous factory whose products you might be familiar with were the sweets company Maynard's, which made wine gums here from 1909. That company actually had operations in Haringey until 1998. The factory was on Vale Road, and you can see a turning to get to that on the left just here. Although we're not going to be going that way today. Now we want to turn left here onto Green Lanes, which has cycle lanes on it. In order to do that, we need to negotiate this rather odd junction. I don't like it at all. It's got a very steep approach, and the give-way line is also really far from the junction itself. So look here, we need to go over this raised table and then turn left. So it's not the best designed junction in the world, but it does put us in these actually pretty decent protected cycle lanes on Green Lanes. The lanes themselves don't go very far, but that's fine because they actually only go as far as we need them. You want to carefully pull up here onto the pavement and dismount. It's not meant for cycling over this crossing. and then on foot we're crossing into the park. That is Finsbury Park to be precise. Now you can cycle on all the paths in Finsbury Park, and it is open 24 hours a day, so you don't need to worry about having to route around here. If you're doing this journey, say in the dark, maybe on a winter's evening as part of a commute. One thing I would say, however, is if you look around, you'll see that there aren't really many street lights, particularly in this section of the park, so it will be quite dark. It's a relatively simple journey, and it's mostly on a big wide path like this, but different people have different thresholds for this kind of stuff, so I'm just pointing it out so that people are aware. Finsbury Park opened in 1869 after the people of Finsbury petitioned Parliament for more open space. Interestingly though, this is not Finsbury. Finsbury is actually an area to the south of Islington, just to the north of the square mile, which is not where Finsbury Park is. But we don't really use the name Finsbury anymore. It's kind of fallen out of use because there isn't a tube station called Finsbury, there isn't a local authority called Finsbury, and those are probably the two main ways that we name things in London. So in a slightly odd twist of fate, Finsbury Park is probably more well known as a name than its namesake Finsbury. It's funny how things work out. Now in terms of cycling conditions, I think it's probably fair to say that they are ideal. This isn't so much a path as a road without any cars on it. It's very, very wide, and it even has big wide pavements which most of the pedestrians are sticking to. This last section here though is pretty busy most of the time, so do make sure you don't go too quickly. We then pull up to the cycle crossing into Finsbury Park Road. The funny thing about Finsbury Park Road is that Thames Water, the water company around here, have been digging it up since I started this channel. They have quite literally been working here for years. The reason I know that is because I've actually been deliberately avoiding doing routes south of Finsbury Park down here, because I wanted to wait until they were finished and I could show you the road as it normally was. But for a couple of years now, they've been saying they'll be finished on X date, then missing the date, giving another date, missing that date, and so on. So I've given up waiting for them, and I'm looking forward to making more videos to and from Finsbury Park, warts and all. Incidentally, those of you who were looking carefully when we crossed out of the park might have noticed that the two halves of this video were filmed on different days. The first half out of Seven Sisters was filmed on a weekend, and this second half here past the park was filmed on a weekday morning rush hour. I won't bother with the boring reason why that is, but safe to say it's to do with those Thames Water roadworks. I actually love filming at this time. There's way more people out on bikes, there's loads of people walking around, and I think it feels a lot more dynamic. It's also probably a bit more representative of the conditions that most people can expect if they're, say, thinking about cycling to work for the first time. There'll be a lot more people around with you making very similar journeys. Unfortunately, it is quite tricky for me to get out and film routes at this time on a weekday, so I can't promise too many more shot at this time, but when I have the opportunity to do so, I will definitely take it, because I think it does just look quite fun. As for the cycling conditions around here that we're cycling through at the moment, we're actually in another low traffic neighbourhood. This is an Islington scheme, and it's the Highbury low traffic neighbourhood, and you can see that the streets are generally really quiet. There's very little traffic about. That said, they've also provided excellent protected cycle lanes for much of the journey. We're on some of them here. In some ways it's kind of overkill to have both an LTN and protected cycle lanes down the same street, and given resources are so limited, it probably would have made sense to build the protected lanes down a main road. Interestingly, the reason that we have ended up with both is because when the cycle lanes were conceived as a project, they didn't know that they were going to be putting in an LTN here. In fact, the idea that you would filter a quite major street like this was probably considered a little bit far-fetched, so it looked like a really good investment. But the project took quite a while to deliver and construct, so by the time those lanes were finished, they had actually delivered a low traffic neighbourhood in the area because the pandemic had completely changed the politics of doing schemes like this, and councils got much bolder with rolling out modal filters. You could see that as an example of bad planning or waste, or you could see it as a positive reflection of the way in which the conversation around cycle infrastructure has really evolved in London in the last few years and how quickly things have developed. I think I probably prefer to see it as the latter, although planning ahead is always good, and I'm interested to hear what you think in the comments. So we're now turning out of this sort of low traffic neighbourhood area and we're heading into a main road called Liverpool Road, and this is a main street running down towards Islington, and as you can see it has pretty decent protected cycle lanes running down the length of it. Now these cycle lanes are really quite good. They're another pandemic scheme and they're put in with these protective wands. You could probably have a few more wands in some of the sections. There are some quite unprotected bits. My understanding is that these lanes will be reworked over the next couple of years with a more permanent design. Maybe we'll see step tracks or curbs instead of these temporary wands. One feature I quite like is the floating parking on the right here. It turns these parked cars into protection, and it also makes the scheme more politically easy to deliver because you don't have to remove as much parking when you put it in, so there's fewer objections. One downside of this scheme is that there's actually a gap coming up in the lane, quite a big gap, and we're going to try and avoid it because we can go through some quiet streets instead. So we're going to turn off right down Brunswick Street and we're going to try and squeeze to the left of this little protective island. If you look on the left here, you'll see the shop with the red sign. It's actually the constituency office of Emily Thornberry MP, who is the MP for this part of Islington. And I think it's fair to say that it's probably one of the more picturesque constituency offices in the country. This really is a lovely little bit of town with some really picturesque squares which are largely traffic free except for the odd Waitrose delivery van and taxi. Although this isn't an officially designated low traffic neighbourhood, you can see why it is quiet, and that's because of filters like this one we're going to go through. It's in the form of a fire gate, but it really does the same thing as a bollard or as those no motor vehicle signs. It prevents through traffic from rat running here, and as a result it makes it a really pleasant environment to cycle in. As a result, we're bypassing that gap in the Liverpool Road cycle lanes. I do hope that that gap is filled actually when the scheme is made permanent. Maybe the design will take that into account. It does get quite tight down there with space, so it might be quite difficult for them to pull it off, but if they can, that would be fantastic, and it might be more direct and certainly easier to find your way. But for now, I can show you the alternative route through these back streets where there's very little in the way of traffic. If you're finding this all a little bit twisty and turny and you think you need some help, you could always download a map of the route. There's a link in the description below the video to a website called Komoot, and you can download the GPX file there and it will work on whatever app or device you choose to use. I do include a map with all my videos and I try and mention it in the videos. Sometimes I forget, but I try to, because if I don't mention it, people usually ask, so I can tell that they're helpful for some people. Now, this street that we're on, Tolpuddle Street, it's quite quiet today. It can sometimes be a bit more hectic as people try and avoid the car parking charges at the supermarket. So you can end up with a lot of illegal parking on there, which can make it feel a little bit less pleasant. Islington Council is going to be looking at the streets in this area soon as part of the Barnsbury and Laycock livable neighbourhood. I believe that's what it's called. It's quite a mouthful. That kind of incorporates a low traffic neighbourhood with modal filters and things like that, but it'll also have other improvements in the rounds like enhanced cycle lanes and new public space and things like that. It's kind of supposed to be a more holistic approach than a traditional LTN. I think we're going to hear about the specifics of that plan by the end of the year. Certainly new cycle lanes on Tolpuddle Street and Penton Street would be great, but here Amwell Street could also really do with some work. You can see that there's just one person in a van dominating the streetscape with, a dozen people on bikes and scooters around them, and it doesn't really feel as good as it could be. I think there's definitely room for improvement here. Now we're going to turn off right here down Margery Street, and when you're coming up this street in the opposite direction, you can see on the other side of those cars there's actually a protected cycle lane for going up the hill. in this direction, it's actually just on the main carriageway. That's fairly common, and rightly so, that if you only have a single direction cycle lane, then you put it uphill rather than downhill, because that's the direction that people need help in. Talking of cycle lanes, there's a new one here, a little wand protected cycle lane. It's actually part of a construction site on the left here, this big project, and it's nice to see cycle safety being considered as part of construction site safety. It's really unusual. In fact, I can't actually think of another example of where a temporary setup for a construction site is actually better than the permanent infrastructure when it comes to providing cycle infrastructure around a construction site. So it is nice to see that. Just a reminder, by the way, that if you're enjoying the video and you're still watching, make sure you hit the subscribe button so that you're alerted to new videos. I think a lot of people don't know what the subscribe button does. It doesn't cost anything, it's free. All it does is mean that when you go on YouTube and you look at your home screen, you're more likely to see videos by this channel, and you might get alerted to new videos as they come up, so you won't miss any. I also always appreciate a like and a comment, as these really do make a difference in helping other people find the videos. And as always, I want to say a huge thank you to everybody who supports the channel on Patreon. If you like what we're doing and you'd like to contribute as well, you can find a link in the description below the video. I also have a note for regular viewers. Sorry for not putting out a video last week. It was because I completely lost my voice. I actually sat down to record the voiceover last weekend and I opened my mouth and it just sounded like squeaking. So I gave up and I've decided to do it again this week. You can probably hear that I'm still a little bit strained, but it does sound like I've just about managed to get through it. So that's good. These cycle lanes on Tavistock Place are fantastic, really good, nice and wide. For those that don't know, it used to actually be a two-way cycle track on the other side of the street only. Camden then converted that into a one-way cycle track and added a second lane here. So they doubled the space and now people can overtake, like that woman on her e-bike did to us just here. If you don't know this area well, by the way, and you find yourself here, my tip is to pay a visit to Gordon Square Gardens on the right there. Not a lot of these Georgian square gardens are open to the public. A lot of them require a key, but this one is open and it's beautifully looked after. It's a really nice place to go with a book or listen to a podcast or music on a sunny day. And we have now found ourselves in Bloomsbury. This is where I'm going to end the ride. I'm actually dismounting, I'm just going to walk down the pavement. We went past University College London a second ago. Here's a big bookshop, etc, etc. Thanks so much for coming with me. I know it was a really long one today, but hopefully you enjoyed that rather than resented it. Please do let me know in the comments what you think. Don't forget to hit like and to subscribe if you're not already subscribed. And thanks again to Patreon subscribers. You support the channel and I really appreciate it. You're all brilliant. In summary, I think that route's pretty good. It's certainly better than it was a few years ago. I think it's really notable that you get improvements from Haringey, improvements from Islington, improvements from Camden. The three boroughs that you pass through, all of them have made progress along that axis. And that's a really good sign, I think, for the future of cycling in this city. If I had to improve certain bits of it, it would probably be around Tolpuddle Street, Amwell Street, those bits where we said it would be nice to have a filter or some protection here. And I think Haringey should also look at an additional filter on Hermitage Road to make that first section a bit safer, and also provide an alternative to Finsbury Park or provide it with proper lighting so that more people feel comfortable enough using it. Anyway, thanks so much for watching. Hopefully next week my voice will be better, not just for the videos, but you know, for daily life and everything like that. And I will see you guys again next time.